Cool. So, hi. Um, is there anything from yesterday that you have lingering questions about, or that you were thinking about overnight that you'd like to follow up on, or for me to clarify?
No articulated questions, lots of thoughts.
Those are also welcome. Excellent. So with that being said, I'm just going to jump in. We were kind of left off talking about kind of like how to structure towards ensuring that the depth of engagement is prioritized over the amount of content, kind of quality over quantity. And with that, we talked a little bit about attention and engagement. And I'm going to be really semantic for a moment and say that focus, attention, and engagement are all different things. And much of our education system, much of the ways in which we are taught to conceptualize engagement is actually about the idea of focus, or rather performing focus. Focus. So for example, there is an instruction given in the workshops that I sat in on to remain in neutral seated position, to not have your cell phones out, not be on other windows, as I had previously discussed. And I think one of the things that theater school, and especially like kind of the Western colonial like ways of conceptualizing theater that we know of, has really ingrained is the idea of the neutral body, which no body is neutral, because neutral is not an inherent quality. And in fact, for students who are disabled, neurodivergent, or otherwise, even just those who are uncomfortable in their body for any reason, expecting to perform an idea of focus that involves eye contact, that involves being seated in a specific way, or involves showing to either the camera or to the facilitator in person that they are engaged, can actually be the most distracting. So as somebody who is both neurodivergent and extremely cross-eyed, there's medical terms for it, but I just call it cross-eyed. I physically can't make eye contact with people. It is not something that is biologically possible for me. The desire for eye contact, or demand for eye contact, is very common in a lot of theater games, and it is extremely heightened by the Zoom medium. So expecting me to be on camera and kind of looking directly at someone is actually the #1 way to ensure that I will not take in a word that is being said to me, because I will not be able to turn off the part of my brain that is focusing on, are they seeing my eyes right? And that's kind of, I'm using that as an example of how instructions that are given in good faith towards encouraging a certain kind of engagement are actually encouraging a performance of engagement, or a performance of focus, which may not actually be aligned with what every student needs. Instead, it is better to encourage students to kind of take a moment to settle in the space, whether that's shared or kind of in their own homes, and find where do they feel best able to hear, best able to see, best able to, and of course, hearing and sight are not required at any time, or best able to kind of respond to what's going on in the space, to respond to the facilitator and to their classmates. So for some students, that might mean turning off the camera on Zoom. For others, it might mean sitting on the floor. That's something I do a lot in Zoom meetings, and it's great. For some students, that might also mean changing from their assigned seat in a classroom that they're used to, because it's not actually, because it's one that the teacher had assigned, not necessarily the one that they feel most comfortable with. And I know you're probably thinking, well, that might result in students wanting to sit near friends who they're talking to a lot, or else completely kind of remove themselves from the Zoom sphere. But kind of reminding students throughout the workshop, like, hey, check in with yourself. Is this still the like where you want to be? Is this still how you want to be? Great. Just little moments like that of checking in, drawing attention, and allowing them to adjust. Because then it also opens space for changes to be made. So if a student in person has been wanting to like sit in a specific way throughout the entire lesson, but then gets uncomfortable, it offers an opportunity for that shift rather than putting them in a potentially socially uncomfortable position to ask for what they need. With that, I mentioned the idea of interdependence, and this is something that is fairly crucial in how a lot of disability justice advocates conceptualize kind of like human interactions. Capitalism dictates that independence is absolutely crucial, that we only focus on our own selves and our own learning needs. However, that is completely antithetical to the theatrical process. So I see actually a lot of overlap between how students who are offered specific tasks can help other students comprehend more, can actually mimic the theatrical collaboration process. An example of this is kind of offering different ways of engaging. If I'm a student who, while other students are reading the text, can't find that level of engagement because I'm not the one reading, because I need to be on in order to feel like really immersed in the play, really immersed in the exercise, then offering to me, hey, this is something you can doodle. Not only are you allowed to, but this is a way you can do it that still relates to the scene. So for example, maybe sketch the character, make a little comic of what the scene is. Or, like I said yesterday, the idea of reading for different purposes. If there are students who are reading in a scene and you want them to focus on the character, you want them to focus on what that character is experiencing in the scene, then tasking other students or giving an invitation for other students to read for words that they don't understand. It kind of activates different ways of reading so that students are never kind of just waiting for their turn. And also means that like it kind of kills two birds with one stone in that way. It means that the students who are reading can only focus on reading or reading out loud, and the students who are not have different ways of summarizing the information, dissecting the information, etc. That can then be relayed back to the other students. Kind of gives everyone an active part. So similarly, I mentioned the idea of kind of multi-step instructions, and what I'm really offering is multi-step instructions or multi-part instructions. And it's really important when you are addressing a group and guiding the whole group through multi-step instructions, that is phrased differently from when you're offering different ways of engagement for instructions. Not sure if that sentence made sense, so please let me know. I
would like a clarification.
I will do that. Thank you. So basically, there's a difference between me saying, okay, class, these three students are going to focus on reading this scene. Meanwhile, the rest of you can do one of these options that are also in the chat. there's a difference between that and saying, okay, class, all of us are going to read through, do this exercise, and I'm going to guide you through the whole exercise kind of as we go. This is a very common thing in theater and in kind of teaching. Suchiththa, you mentioned it yesterday, the idea of, I know, like the teacher, the director knows what is going on, and the students will receive that information as needed. That actually can be really destabilizing for students who are doing something for the first time. So for example, there's that lovely movement exploration of the shipwreck that Sam offered. And it was really wonderful to see how all the different students engaged with it. But this is an exercise that happened kind of in the middle of reading the script. They were reading through the first scene, and then they put the scripts away to go back to reading, to do the shipwreck exploration, and then went back to reading, and then tried to integrate it together. This can cause students to kind of not know what the expectations are, especially if there's scripts being put away versus being read, text that is spoken or not spoken. Not every student is going to know where in the script we are at any given point in time. So making it very clear of, do you need your script for this? Or do you need to be following along for this? Making it very clear of, this movement exploration is going to happen on this scene. You don't need to worry about the timing right now. You just need to worry about kind of building that image. What I saw in the workshop was kind of the offer of building the image, but with the text also kind of being layered in with it at the same time. And that creates an expectation of students having to know where in the script they are, which can be distracting from the actual movement exploration. So for example, guiding the students through the movement exploration might look like this. Okay, you can put your scripts away. You do not need to worry about where we are in the scene. I'm going to set the expectation of, I'm going to explain what the exercise is, explain all the different parts of the exercise, and show an example afterward, after I'm done explaining, of what it might look like. This kind of breaks down the different ways that information is being relayed, and also sets an example. I mentioned yesterday the idea of scripting, and that ultimately has to do with setting expectations. So if I don't, I as a student, don't know what the teacher is looking for in terms of a shipwreck, or don't know if I'm supposed to still have my lines, or if I don't know if I'm allowed to use my body, then those are things that I might struggle with. So making it very clear kind of what is and is not being expected, and offering all of the information up front, and then saying, okay, so now we're going to start with step 1, like I said, and now we're going to go into step 2 and 3 and 4. Just again, kind of like offering the information up front and then integrating it throughout. So with that, I offered yesterday that it might be a good idea to consider how different ways of looking at the script can actually be factored into the 3 different days. Instead of kind of going back and forth between reading and acting and movement and character and reading more and performing. Totally understand why that's set up that way. It offers different ways of engaging for different days for each student on the same day. However, again, it's a lot of different ways of engaging. It's a lot, which is fine. It's just might not be what everyone needs. So I would recommend having the first day set for, okay, so today, your goal for today is to learn what this play is. Learn what how Shakespeare writes, learn what the characters are, learn what the plot is. Because then the students know, okay, if I'm reading anything and I don't understand kind of how it would be staged, I don't understand like how I would act this, everything like that, those questions will be answered the next day. Offering that, so then the next day, focusing on that movement, on the staging, even saying, okay, we have an understanding of the plot now, so we don't necessarily need to look at the text today. Now that might sound very kind of strange, the idea of we don't need to look at the script, but if you have like deep engagement with making sure that the students understand the text on the first day, then the second day can be less text oriented, and then the third day can be putting them together. Again, just kind of breaking it down and separating it out. Kind of looking more at the facilitation approach and like how the script is read. I really would like to encourage, or rather discourage, the idea of something sounding good, or sounding natural or sounding smooth. Speaking the speech trippingly on the tongue does not necessarily mean that the actor understands what they're saying. And does not necessarily mean that the actor is aware of kind of what the character is experiencing. And that's something that, again, it's just a decentering of text being the only way that, or a specific way of speaking the text as the only way that a student might show that they understand. So I'm just reading through. So with that, we talk about pace a lot in theater. We talk about pace a lot in terms of reading. But pace, again, doesn't necessarily equal comprehension, and can in fact cause students who are struggling with reading like a disconnect between reading for when is my line versus reading for the scene. Actors who are encouraged to focus on how they sound might be tempted to kind of scan the script for, okay, am I in the scene? Do I have to sound out in my head what that line will sound like, rather than listening to their scene partners? So again, just offering a chance to slow down, offering that they can sound out lines. And also that if a student is missing their line, don't give it to them. Instead, it's great to offer them a chance of saying it themselves. So for example, instead of saying, oh, these are the first few words of Malvolio's line, instead saying, hey, this is Mariah's line. Can you tell me what Malvolio says next? With that, and I forgot to say this before, Shakespeare numbers lines, and that's great. We should do it too. Because it helps students orient themselves on the page. That's why Shakespeare did it, or rather his printers did it. And it genuinely helps because there's a lot of information and a lot of text. So saying, so if a student is unable to find where they are, offering, okay, so your classmate just said line 63, which is Mariah's line. What does Malvolio say for line 64? so that they have the opportunity to do it rather than just repeating what the facilitator has said. Yeah, so again, just kind of scaffolding instructions as telling the information up front, showing what that might look like, and then kind of transitioning into guiding through instead of telling while showing from the outset.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Only because I think I'll forget this later. Is if you have, students who are struggling with their line, I heard you say earlier, don't just let them struggle, or don't let them struggle. Get the entire class in together. Have folks work together interdependently rather than independently. And I'm hearing an overlap between that and what you've just said, in an interesting way, that if someone hasn't been able to say their line for whatever reason, whether they weren't following along or they don't know how to say it, again, if they kind of give you this blank look, I guess you can bring the entire class in there again as well. All right, let's everyone say line 64 together and go for it.
That's a fantastic idea, because then also it kind of like puts the pressure down a bit, to kind of say it correctly or to like keep up if everyone is kind of supporting one another. One of the exercises that I really love doing, and I haven't necessarily figured out a way to integrate it into this lesson plan, but food for thought, is the idea of like fan and coach. I've done this in a lot of settings where we might be rehearsing a piece, so it might be actually more relevant for the summer camps of if students are rehearsing a scene and then other students are not. I mean, obviously we still want to give them things to do, and one of the ways that we can activate them as audience members is by putting them in the role of the audience, and offering, you can be like, you can look at the scene and think about it as a fan, so things that you found really exciting, and as a coach, or things that you have questions about, not criticisms, questions, because that allows them to kind of look at each other's work, reflect back. It's especially helpful for older students, and also decenters the idea of criticism as the only way of offering feedback to your peers. Let's talk about choice paralysis. Choice paralysis is a term used by the neurodivergent community to talk about an executive functioning, or an executive dysfunction of where, when you have a range of options for things to do, you don't really know what to do because you don't know what choice is best. You can see this a lot, even in terms of daily tasks, like, should I do the laundry before I clean my room? And then neither gets done. Calling myself out here. Because so offering not only here are things you can do, but also an example of how you can do them, can help limit that a bit. So because it's less, it makes the options more defined and concrete. So for example, with the shipwreck, offer a lot of explanations, or a lot of descriptors. One of the ways that choice paralysis kind of happens is, and I also want to note that this is not necessarily a term that is, this is a term that has been coined by the neurodivergent community and has not necessarily been approved by many physically disabled people. However, there are overlaps there. But using it because of the way that it's used within the neurodivergent community and within neurodivergent activism. So a mental image is something that can cause this kind of choice dysfunction. So if I am asked to imagine a shipwreck, there are a lot of different things that can come to mind. Or to show a shipwreck, there's a lot of different things that can come to mind. So offering like detailed descriptors, asking questions while giving those instructions. So again, setting the expectation and then saying, and then as you're going through each step, offering more concrete details, more tactile details, more offers, like, can you show me how the sails might look, like how flapping in the wind might look? Or can you show me how somebody might be experiencing like dizziness or seasickness? Is it just kind of makes it more solid, more concrete, and makes the mental images a bit more accessible for students who might be overwhelmed by the frenzy of activity. Again, like offering a lot of very defined small tasks instead of opening it up like big tasks. One of the things that I noticed in the structure of the workshops is that students were offered the second time the summary of what the scenes were rather than the first time. So as they were reading through the script, they read through it twice. And the first time it was only the character names and who was playing them were given. The second time, Sam was offering descriptions of this summaries of the scene before each scene. And I just had questions about that. I thought it was an interesting approach. But I think, again, encouraging that interdependence, that can be something that's embedded within the first read already is, all right, one of the offers is like, as you're listening to your classmates read, as you're reading along, jot down a couple of notes about like what happens in this scene. And then at the end of reading the scene, those students can share. And then they move on to the next one. So that kind of integrates the deep learning of the text from the start. Anytime you give an instruction, write it down. This is, for example, we are reading for the top of scene 2. The top of the page versus the top of the scene versus the top of the play. Again, just jargon, setting the expectations. So at first workshop, part of setting the expectations is also clarifying what language you're going to use. So if I say take it from the top, that means the top of the scene or stuff like that. It's something that, yeah, it's everything is contextual, and idioms and metaphors, such as like file away, make a mental note of it, might not necessarily be made explicit. There's a difference between what is immediately relevant and what is not. So instead of make a mental note of what lines don't make sense to you, maybe instead offering keep a list of what lines don't make sense to you, and you can ask those questions at this time, because then it makes it immediately relevant and demystifies the jargon. Oh yeah, active versus passive engagement is kind of what I've been kind of circling around. The idea that some students need to be kind of on, need to kind of always be raising their hand, need to always be offering information in order to best learn, and that should not be discouraged. Similar to how some students need to just kind of like listen to the information before they are able to engage as like what they need, and should also not be discouraged. So there were some students who really wanted to jump in and offer to read for scenes if a student wasn't there. And like, again, encouraging that, acknowledging that like that is a great offer, and saying, okay, there are other students who haven't read yet, so here is something else you can do. Sam already did a really great job of kind of like managing those kind of dynamics, but just redirecting that need for engaging actively towards something else. Kind of making offers of alternatives rather than shutting down offers that are being presented. I'm trying to like scan through. To make my font a bit smaller. As I'm doing this, I recognize that we have 10 minutes before Suchiththa needs to leave. So is there anything you want to share or comment on?
Very, very quickly, you mentioned putting the scene backgrounds at the top of the scene rather than, you know, not scene background, scene, what's the word?
Like summaries, yeah.
Summaries, thank you. Scene summaries. I wrote down breakdowns for some stupid reason. Summaries at the top of the scene rather than the bottom. Now, my fear, and it's a fear, so it's not necessarily rooted in logic, but is that if we do that, then the students don't discover the scene for themselves. And I know, but at the same time, when it's the younger kids, I'm like, yes, give them the scene summary because they're going to need the help with the language and, you know, all the things happening.
Something that's come up, and then it also, to me, connects to your point, Max, about, you know, let's do the shipwreck. And so much of, and having, you know, been an acting instructor and taking acting classes, there's so much importance given to discovery. The like, do it, and what the jewels you'll find is, you know, what you find while you're doing it. And so that's a lot of the notes that I've been taking is, why is discovery so prioritized and centered in the work that we do? And who does discovery benefit? Or like, by centering discovery, who, you know, what kind of folks are we, I guess, what access, you know, who's let in and who has the barrier put in front of them.
So I really appreciate that both of you are bringing this up, and you kind of touch on a couple different points that I'm going to just respond to while we still have you. So first of all, I think something that you alluded to, Suchiththa, that is one of the things that gets that gets in the way of access is the idea of that which is age appropriate. Instructions being delivered in a way that is,
okay.
Yeah. I haven't fully articulated that thought, but that's something that I see a lot of when I'm talking about kind of the way that information is delivered. And I will say that there are jewels of discovery that you can have even while making the instructions explicit. So what I offered just now of kind of explaining what the purpose and kind of what the process of the movement exploration will be before you start it, doesn't mean you have to give every instruction. So the offers of very specific prompts, like the wind in the sails, like how big are the waves? Can you show me how big the wave is? Have you ever seen a wave that big before? Those kind of offers and questions are where discovery can still happen while not kind of like giving it away from the outset, but while still kind of setting the expectation. And also setting that expectation of, I'm going to offer you some prompts. You don't have to respond to them, but they're there if you want them. And yeah, just the idea of discovery being, it is something that can be really insightful for a lot of students. and can also allow them to kind of a creative ownership. And again, phrasing instructions or offers as questions can kind of still offer that kind of space for discovery and for them answering the questions in whatever way that they want to, while still making it a bit more structured, is kind of my answer, but definitely something that I would love to continue chatting about.
How does that relate to the summaries being presented or not being presented?
Thank you for reminding me of that, because I was like, I know I'm missing something. So what I had seen in the workshops was that the first time that the script was gone through, the summaries were not given at all, not even when kind of explaining the characters and who they are. It was the second time that the summaries were given. And what I'm actually proposing is that the first time that the scenes are read, kind of, again, engaging that interdependence, the scene is read, and then the students who were listening are offered like, hey, give me a summary, or what did you see? What did you hear? So it's kind of just kind of collapsing those two separate readings with just the first time, cuts time, and also has more students engaged in different ways, and also allows students to know whether or not they missed something. And again, that allows students who need active engagement to have that kind of active engagement, even if they're not reading. I'm like trying to give you the highest level like spark notes almost of because I had a lot of scribbles, but what I will say as well is if an image is on a screen or being drawn or anything, describe it. If music is being played, make sure the lyrics are on the screen or visible. If something is written in the chat, say it out loud, because that might also be just a technology access as well as a reading access. And if there's a specific way that information is being presented, for example, through color coding or through like formatting or anything, again, it's kind of like how like teaching the rules of the game. Make sure that that's something that is explained, because I noticed on the first day that there was a moment where they were looking at a passage from Viola, and there was kind of color coding to indicate changes in thought. And if I was reading that passage for the first time and I didn't know what I was supposed to be reading for, again, making clear what you're supposed to be reading for, I would spend the entire time trying to figure out what the colors meant. Just kind of explicitly offering kind of the security and the tools, letting them know that they have the tools that they need to play the game of the workshop.
And did you find the colors to be, I mean, not that you can speak for everyone else, but like, were they inaccessible from a colorblind perspective? Like,
I'm not colorblind, so I don't know.
no, I know, but like in the sense of like, there's always going to be colors that someone can't see, and so different fonts would have been more helpful than just different colors, different font types.
Yes and no. So there are specific
Oh, sorry.
fonts that I will send to you that are created by and for low vision individuals. And there's a very easy thing. So it's called the American Printing House for the Blind, APHB font. You can download it and put it into Canva. It's great. And there are specific color combinations that you can check very easily using WebAIM. which is the web accessibility kind of image checker. And so you can put in color combinations
Yeah,
and it'll
I've
show
got a
you.
color contrast analyzer as well for
Yeah.
that exact reason. Cool.
Generally speaking, sans serif, size 14 or bigger, with dark background and yellow font is great, because then it's also, not only is that high contrast, but it's also less visually overwhelming. I always have all of my browser and everything in dark mode, because then the visual stimulus of the white light
It's
is
not overwhelming.
exactly. And if you're ever unsure of if a voiceover or screen reader can read something, very simply, if you're on a Mac, there is voiceover software that is integrated. You can access it by pressing, I think, Command 5 or Command F5. And if you have Google Chrome, there's also voiceover software integrated within that. Of course, that's not what everyone's using, but it's just kind of is screen reader equivalents that are not necessarily things that you have to install on your computer in order to test them.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Max. I'm going to go now. Please carry on, two of you, and I will watch the rest of the recording, and I'll send you any questions I have, MC. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope your phone is fine.
Why? So do I. I wasn't planning on leaving this meeting early, but then I wasn't planning on breaking my phone screen on Wednesday either, so. C'est la vie. All right. Bye.
All right. Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of continue. I recognize that I'm kind of jumping around right now, but that's because I want to make sure that I hit kind of the most salient points. One of the things that is really important to consider when you're thinking about accessibility for workshops is that in terms of engagement is a two-way street, which means that ways that the students feel the most engaged may not feel like engagement from the facilitator's point of view. So there's a piece around like reminding facilitators that, first of all, their access needs are also important and are equally as important. And also that they are allowed to check in with the students of, hey, how's everybody feeling? Do you need anything else? Like just kind of taking a temperature of the room, because when we decenter the need to perform focus or perform engagement, it can lead to some facilitators feeling like, oh, like they aren't engaged, all their cameras are off, they're not interested in what I'm saying. So yeah, just like that is kind of a piece around it as well. I couldn't tell, and this kind of goes back to the idea of like a survey or taking kind of an idea of where the class is at before the workshop. I couldn't tell if the students were expected to know the plot of the play from the outset, or if they were expected to have kind of already read it or already know why we read Shakespeare, why we want to act Shakespeare. And so again, setting the expectations involves also saying, what is this for? Because the why of it is where you're going to get motivation. And that's something that Sam actually got to at the end. The third workshop, Sam referenced all of these movies and other forms of media that are inspired by plays that we associate with Shakespeare, and offering those from the outset, it kind of offers a way in, kind of contextualizes what we're working towards, especially for students who may have genuine criticisms or a discomfort with reading the text of an old dead white guy, which is fair. And yeah, just kind of offering, it also allows the facilitator to kind of relate to the students, like, why am I here? Why do I do this? Again, these are things that Sam got to at the very end of the workshop, but I would encourage that happening from the outset to kind of build that relationship. It is better. So in terms of presenting information, again, presented in different ways. There's scripts that are Word documents or PDFs. There's also the offer of this is how you can listen to it recorded, because guarantee any Shakespeare play we think of, there's probably a recording of it somewhere, or this is a movie version, or this is like this is a scene by scene breakdown. Not necessarily that those have to be what they're looking at during the workshops, but offers for them to think about it in between workshops. If you feel like you want to know more, if you feel like there's something that you're missing, here are other ways of learning more about this play. Because then if reading a script isn't the most accessible thing for the student, then they have those other offers that they can engage with if they so choose. Oh, language. There was a moment where Sam mentioned that this is language that you already know. That can be really reassuring for some students, but you just want to remember English might not be comfortable for all students. It might not be their first language. It might not be a language that they engage with at all. So just like offering reminders that it's okay if it feels different. There are certain phrases like ist, certain words and phrases that are in the glossary that I think can be highlighted at the very beginning of reading the text, because they are going to come up multiple times. And also offer the kids a character map. This is something that will help the fantastic exploration of all the characters, the really fun ways of thinking about like music and kind of what the characters might be like. It puts it in a context, and kind of allows them to know kind of where they're at with each character in each scene. I think those are the very big things. And I would like to hear in the last couple of minutes what questions you have and what thoughts you have.
Thank you for all of this. This is given, I have a lot of ideas of how we can move forward and try things out and support the facilitators more and support the students. I think I solved this, not solved, but like I think I answered my own question in my head over the course of our discussion today, because we do a lot of community outreach work, and we started that work with like, we want to know what the community wants, and did a lot of like, what do you want? And we got a lot of, I don't know, what do you do? Like, so your points that and I connect that to your points that you're making around, people don't know what they want, and especially and people don't know what they want. People don't even know necessarily what they need, especially if those options for what they need haven't ever been offered before. and people, and I think you mentioned this yesterday, it's important for people to try out different ways of engaging, because they might discover, yikes, I'm so engaged when I doodle, and this has never been something that I've ever felt allowed to do for whatever reason. So I'm really, that's like a big a learning that I'm taking with me, that from the community outreach work, that I'm like, oh yeah, of course it makes sense in the classroom as well. And that to me is about kind of what Sam is doing, and you touched on this in terms of like, there are multiple ways in, there are multiple entries in. Each of those entries has to have 5 other doors beside it. So I really appreciate your point about like, while we're doing this physical warm up, or while we're reading this, can, use you, or who, I need you to either search for the words that are, difficult for you, or draw a picture, or mouth along with it, or whatever it is, like that there are, that each door for access is, that there are different ways to get inside that door, I guess. And I had a question that I was like, on one hand, one of your points that you made was like to not do too many things at the same time. And on the other hand, it's something that I've heard and taking is providing as many opportunities to engage as possible. And so I guess the answer, or like how I'm squaring that in my head, when I, at the beginning of this, I was like seeing a conflict. I'm like, well, which is it? Is it like, is it one or is it the other? Or like, how do you do both at the same time? And here's where I'm coming to it. And I'd love to hear your response to this, or see what I think. It's just about being clear about what we're doing at every time, at every moment. So whether or not, we take, your offer of like, day 1 is maybe text, and day 2 is character, and day 3 is story. Or it could be, if we want to do 3 each day, that it's upon us to be clear from the outset that this workshop is divided into 3 sections. Part 1, we're exploring text. Part 2, we're exploring character. Part 3, we're I put it in the chat. We're in part 1. The point of part 1 is blah, 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 blah. Let's do this together. Then when I get to part 2, I say, now we're in part 2. Remember the 3 parts that I said? So that's how I'm sort of, I guess, squaring the, that like, be, clear and intentional with what you're doing, with allowing different learning styles and needs to enter, and to be surprised at, like, and to discover, oh yeah, actually this is the best way that I learned. Still making space for that, I guess.
Absolutely, you got it. That is kind of the idea of like, we have a syllabus. Students are handed syllabi in their other classes. And it's ultimately a guideline and a suggestion and an offer. And phrasing it that way, as we're planning on doing these 3 things. We might not get to all 3 of them, but that's kind of the idea. Just kind of, giving space for what happens in the space and everything. And yeah, just being really clear with like, these 3, you are my actors for this scene. Audience, here's the different ways that you can be an audience. And instead of even saying like, when you're not an actor in the scene, you're an audience, even phrasing it as, you are going to be our dramaturgs, you are going to be our stage managers, our designers, our collaborators in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of theater education for students who might not necessarily, or a lot of the idea of theater for students who might not be exposed to it otherwise, is very centered on acting as theater making. And one of the ways that we can kind of encourage, without necessarily casting anybody in the roles of like designer, etc., is saying like, you know, other people are always in the rehearsal room and they're always thinking about the text in a different way. And you always have the option of doing that. So yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just more information doesn't hurt anybody. But if a student is asking for a clarification on the information because it is a little too much, ask what they need clarified. So instead of saying like, if a student says like, I don't know what line we're on, it's like, okay, what was the last time a line that you do remember? Oh, that was line 47. We're actually down here at line 63. That's okay. So this is what line 63 was. Can you tell me what line 64 is? Stuff like that. Just kind of invites for them to also think about like, oh, I'm allowed to say what is wrong, or it kind of offers that opportunity to articulate it when they might not know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's so many great things to that I'm taking from this, and I'm also glad that we're in the summer now, and I hope we will find time for some program redesign, and yeah, I don't know, I guess I'm like really troubled by the term sounding good, and didn't know how present that was in the rehearsal hall, and thinking about like I don't know, a code that we create, that we, you know, share with our facilitators, which is about what we're not prioritizing when we do Shakespeare, which are those systemic barriers of how it sounds, or how to perform it, or who it was, you know, like the historical context, or what, you know, these words actually mean. So anyway, I'm also taking that important information in terms of how we talk about the work that we do for our artist educators who are going into the schools and going in with their own biases and learnings and teachings. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, that's one of the things that I was referencing a lot was capitalism, and also like the theater industry as a whole, Western colonial theater industry as a whole, because these are things that are taught. Ableism is something that is taught, and must, like, I don't claim to know everything. I don't claim that that there's not a whole lot of unlearning that I still have to do, but I'm excited by opportunities to reflect on what things I take for granted, or what things that I accept as regular parts of the ways that I engage. And I'm really excited by opportunities like this to once again interrogate those things for myself, because I had that experience while reviewing kind of what I wanted to speak about with the two of you. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for all of your time and sharing and the generosity of sharing all of your thoughts, and for jumping on board too, and continuing to be on board throughout our busyness. And yeah, I'm just also really glad that we built this connection, and then also wanted to invite you to, you know, send an invoice when you can, or like to, you know, honor that offer and ensure that we make that happen. Because I know that just to me feels like so long ago that we had that conversation, but wanted to make sure that was still part, obviously, of this agreement.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate that reminder. And I will also send you kind of my unorganized notes. I can't guarantee that there's not going to be a whole lot of me repeating myself, because I realize that that's what it is. So it's not actually 30 pages, it just looks like it. And I'm also happy, like, if there are any like questions that you have that anybody else in the team has, or any feedback that you'd like to offer to me, please, like, I welcome that. I definitely see this as like as much as I'm consulting and sharing my thoughts, I would love I also
Sure.
like feedback and
Sure.
want to grow in
Cool.
my process as well.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank
And
you.
please do share all those notes. I'm sure that we will take and grab and ask questions and things like that.
Just gonna like
Totally.
dump my library at you.
Please, yeah.
Ooh, actually, with
Yeah.
that being said, I will also send you a list of articles and other websites and like different things that I looked at while looking at universal design and learning and how that's being applied for digital mediums. I read a fantastic report on how like a specific researcher is working with neurodivergent and development and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in devised theater processes. That's really awesome. Just a whole lot of things to think about, and of course can also be translated off like offline in person as well.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Please share those resources.
Totally.
Cool.
Yay!
Thank you. Thanks so much for all of this. I really appreciate it. And yeah. I know this isn't goodbye forever. Looking forward to reconnecting in sometime soon.
Absolutely. Keep in
Yeah.
touch, and I will as well. All right.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Have a good one. Thanks for
You too.
everything. Okay. Bye-bye.